Hey everyone, my name is Tosh. I'm a DJ and producer based here in San Francisco. And today with me, I have Idea Unsound, who will be performing at Saturday's event. And we're here to talk to him about his background, how he got into live coding, and some of his thoughts on the future of the space. So, Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Idea Unsound, my production name, and I am a multimedia artist and music producer based here in San Francisco. I've been kind of experimenting on the intersection of jazz and electronic for a couple of years now, and have introduced live coding into my setup recently to just kind of push the cutting edge of what I think I can do.
Cool. And tell us how you got into music. I know you went to the Conservatory here in San Francisco, and what was your journey? Were you a classical musician prior to this, or did you jump right into electronic music?
Yeah, not quite a classical musician from the beginning. I was actually in the Air Force before I went to the Conservatory, and I was an intelligence surveillance operator. However, I loved making music, so I was religiously making music and beats. Even I took a drum machine with me to Afghanistan one time.
Wow.
I was just religiously making music and applied to the Conservatory because I was interested in unlocking the next step of my musical journey, I guess. And from there, I just started integrating that kind of musical tutelage into my electronic music.
Very cool.
And that also exposed me a lot to some of these newer technologies, like live coding, projection mapping, and all these other new ways that we can interact with things.
Very cool. So a couple questions. One, when you were in Afghanistan, how did other people in the Air Force feel about your music making? Is it something that they were supportive of? Were there a lot of other people who were also making music there, or was it just you?
That's a great question. They were supportive, but also just kind of confused. I have an Ableton Push, which is a grid controller. It doesn't look like your typical musical instrument.
Yeah.
And that was my primary means of making music with my laptop, as well as a pair of headphones. So I would really just be in the rec tent, just off in the corner, and I'd just have my headphones on and just pushing out some beats. People would be playing Call of Duty in the other corner over there, like playing ping pong and maybe the next floor up.
Yeah.
Nobody really bothered me, but nobody really, maybe
engaged with it too much.
Engaged with it, yeah. Okay. I remember I did try to go to the talent show in Afghanistan one time. I was really, really pumped on performing. It sounds so silly. We're there, we're flying intelligence missions, and I'm just like, oh boy.
I mean, I figure you gotta have those things that you're excited about, right? Because it's you know that the work it's for this really great mission and for the support of the country, and yet I can't imagine the day-to-day is something that you get excited about in the same way as you might make music. And so I imagine everyone needs something, whether that's a loved one back home or their calls with that to look forward to, and it sounds like for you it was the music that kept you motivated through those years.
Totally, yeah. There's a lot of downtime.
Okay.
So in between, doing your thing, you land. I was a flyer, so we'd fly, run a mission, land. We'd have maybe 16 hours, to do with what you want. So you get your exercise in, do a little workout. I got in Muay Thai a little bit, so it was good. But other than that, you just have to keep yourself busy because there's nothing really happening on base. You can't really go off base at all. And the few things that do happen on base are really low production quality. Yeah. Just because it's, they have to work with what they have. So bring your own entertainment, I say. And for me, that was Ableton and electronic music. I should also mention that the internet there is as slow as dial-up and as expensive as gigabit. So not a whole lot of incentive to use the internet. Yeah. So you're kind of forced to work outside of that connected space and keep yourself occupied.
And how did you learn if you were not so connected to the internet? I mean, these days I've learned almost everything that I know about music through the internet. What were your main sources of learning how to actually use the tools that you had?
That's a good question. I guess to go back even further, I've been making music with electronics, with computers and DAWs for almost 20 years now. Mm-hmm. So I've been making beats and little clips that I would upload to Newgrounds at first back in the early 2000s. And that kind of evolved into me uploading songs, finished tracks, SoundCloud, submitting to record labels, and getting more and more established into music. So by the time I was in the Air Force, I had already had about, 10 years of music production under
Cool.
my belt. I wasn't by any means that good.
Yeah.
But I understood how to do it. And that
Okay.
was one of the times where I really like started figuring out some good tricks, some good moves to put into my palette, because there was nothing else to do.
Yeah. And I imagine being in the Air Force was quite an emotional journey, and like, how did that influence the type of music you were making? Did it have an influence, or did you use it mostly as an escape to kind of get out of the headspace?
No, it totally did have an influence. A lot of my stuff at the time was desert themed or like
Okay.
desert inspired. I actually put out a short album a few years back. I didn't officially release it, but I did put it on Bandcamp. I didn't distribute it through a major distributor or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I did make a short beat tape just based on my experience in Afghanistan called Desert Heat.
Wow.
And it was using some samples of records that had a lot of like that feeling, and then some of the track titles were based off of experiences there. Like Bagram Brunch, for example,
Yeah.
was named after the base Bagram Air Force Base, and I made it during brunch, and I think we had a rocket attack
Oh my
during
God.
the middle of the
Wow.
session. So I was like, okay, that was kind of interesting. I'll name it after rocket attacks. You know, you hear the alarm, you get down, you get up, you check everything, you go get ice cream. So it's an experience.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like an experience, one that I'm grateful that there are folks like you who have been on those front lines to protect people like us at home. So yeah, thanks for doing that.
I do what I can.
So fast forwarding a little bit to your time in the Conservatory, this is also, for me, I come from a very non-traditional music background where I started learning actually like in my 20s and getting really into it. And I've always kind of dreamed of like, what would it feel like to go to music school and be just surrounded by other people who are like loving music and talking about music, and what was that experience like for you?
It was good. The Conservatory, by all standards, is a top class university. I can safely say that the teachers care about their students in that they'll go above and beyond just teaching you. I got piano lessons from a teacher there just because I asked.
Yeah.
I asked, and she just agreed to teach me how to play piano for a year.
Yeah.
So that was great. So the teachers and the students that go there are really, really focused on what they're trying to do. Be that play for the symphony or perform in an opera or what have you.
Yeah.
I will say that the only caveat is that the technology aspect is so new that it still needs some expansion.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, they're opening a new building pretty soon that's going to have a really, really capable workspace for music production and integrating technology with the tutelage. However, it definitely, there was for me that like feeling of like, okay, I really want to go deeper into the tech. Like I really, really crave that.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was purely musical.
Okay.
Purely,
And what's the balance between people who are studying classical music or I guess other genres versus electronic music?
There aren't a whole lot of people studying electronic music per se.
Okay.
Most people are interested in more film composition, game composition,
Which is still largely electronically developed these days.
Okay, yeah,
but it's not. Yeah,
I
but
should
it's not the genre that
differentiate.
electronic music.
EDM or pop music.
Yeah.
Like music for the sake of releasing dance records.
Yeah.
So there was a few people that were interested in kind of going that route and the performative route, and there was a really cool. There was a lot of really cool experimentation with mixing that style of music with these kind of elevated genres and blending hip hop with ballet and projection mapping and stuff like that. So there was a lot of experimentation with some of the students in those respects. But I think the core focus of the school was definitely on music theory, understanding how harmonic language works.
Yeah.
And then there was technology that was also used. But like I said, there could be, maybe I'm just like pure tech, just like more computers, more. But like, I think like, let's throw in C++. Yeah. That's important. Let's throw in more Unity, stuff like that. Those are important tools that you need to learn how to use if you want to go down a music technology path.
Absolutely. And these days it seems like a lot of music production is influenced by the tools, whether you're directly in the code or you're not, you are very much surrounded, and you're limited or enabled by the technology that you're choosing to use. So yeah, my last question on the conservatory, what was the balance between instrumentalists versus folks studying composition or production?
That's a good question. At least in the TAC program, there was a very, very big spread of people's abilities on different instruments. Like the whole premise of, I mean, I guess, and maybe I'm reaching here, but the premise of going to like a school like this is you want to get really good at your instrument, or you want to get really good at your craft and study perhaps under a master to focus on how to unlock those parts of your instrument that you didn't really know existed. But with the TAC program, everybody has such a unique background. Like there was another military person, but he was from the Army. You know, we had no interactions about as far as our jobs go. Something completely different. And he was actually interested in doing classical composition and film music and stuff like that. So there was such a huge spread of people that it was hard to say. You know, I learned how to play the piano there, but I knew how to play the guitar a bit going in. One of my classmates, she's a performer by the name of Jana. She plays classical piano, but also makes EDM dubstep.
Interesting.
But she'd been playing piano for 20 years. So, you know, that's a major part of her tool set. So there's such a huge spread of instrumentalists and musicians that it's more like if you show aptitude for making music or wanting to finish music, then that's what they're looking for more.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really excited about more of these hybrid producers who maybe have a background in classical and are now getting into electronic. One of my favorite producers, Sebastian Muller, has done a piece recently with the Seeq Orchestra, and really tying together some of the kind of techno style of productions with having a 15-piece orchestra performing in a concert that starts a little more ambient and eventually gets a little more movement inducing, which is really neat. So definitely excited about that that edge. So you said you kind of were exposed to live coding for the first time at school. What was that exposure like? Was it through classes? Was it through a friend? And how did you get more into it?
Yeah, we have a studio director at the Conservatory TAC program. His name is Torin, and he is always showing students new, engaging ways to get into these like kind of more esoteric forms of music making and stuff like that. So I think he probably, I think for a fact, it was during Mac's MSP class. We have a Mac's MSP class, and he was talking about different ways that we can make music with Macs algorithmically. And then we started talking about tidal cycles and I think some other programming languages for that that I can't think of right now. But that kind of triggered me a little bit about what else was out there, because I was like, tidal cycles is interesting, but like what other methods can we do to make music? And I'm particularly in the Ableton ecosphere as far as like my tool set. And so I got really curious as to how I could use these programmatic tools inside of Ableton and what could be possible that way.
And did you have a coding background before you got into live coding, or that was one of your first exposures to coding?
Yeah, that was actually probably one of my first exposures.
Very cool.
I've been learning Python just in the background to go with my live shows, because I use a program called Touch Designer, which is Python based. And the more you know, the more you can do with it. So I've been learning Python in conjunction of using that program. However, that kind of opened the doorway to me picking up some of these other programming languages a little bit, or being more receptive to them at least.
Very cool. And what about live coding keeps you, like, you got interested in it? Why are you still live coding? What are the pros and cons of using live coding versus other types of performance?
That's a good question too. There are a couple of obvious pros and cons. I think the obvious con is that you can't really determine what you're going to come out with. You can have an idea, you can have a direction, but it's really hard to determine, okay, this is exactly what I want to do, unless you've gone through and written out all of your code beforehand, which doesn't seem like what performers tend to want to do a lot of the times. It seems to be more improvised, which is one of the pros, I would say. it's a way to improvise as an electronic musician
Yep.
that normally we are not able to do.
Yeah.
We're not exposed to, rather.
Yeah, I think there's been this big conversation around like what is live as a live performance, and something that I've been really struggling with over the course of the last year is how do you make electronic music more live, and does that mean you have to use your vocal or have to use an instrument like the guitar, or is there perhaps something else that you can be doing live? Like recently, my sets have been live arrangement, where the song will create a different arc from beginning to end based on how I'm feeling in that moment or how long I think that the audience is reacting to it. And so you're always kind of figuring out, okay, what is the live aspect of it? And it sounds like with live coding, there's a lot more you can be doing live rather than being in a structured Ableton project.
Yeah, it's almost like the code becomes an extension of the instrument.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, there are instruments that you can interact with Ableton. There are ways to perform live electronically. This is nothing new by any means.
Yeah.
However, this is a way that we can definitely interact with these systems like never before.
Yeah.
For example, I can produce a meter in live code that just simply can't be produced organically.
Yeah.
I can use multiples of meter. I can have polyrhythms happening in loops that just organically are technically unfeasible.
Yeah, and it's super hard to play on a drum kit, for example.
Super hard to play. Yeah. BPMs can modulate back and forth in systems that the modulation itself between two tempos can create a new kind of pattern itself. So you can use tempo itself to create another tempo.
Yeah.
And that's a little technique I've been experimenting with called variable BPM. So like creating a piece of music that doesn't have one set BPM, it's constantly in flux. But by doing that, it creates a pattern which becomes a consistency throughout the song.
And in a way, that happens a little more organically with a live performance because you might have a drummer who is inconsistent in their BPM and maybe speeds it up during a really energetic section and then slows it down again. So in a way, even though this is going really in the digital world, there are elements of it that are swinging back around to the kind of more live feeling side of it, which is really neat.
Totally, yeah.
Cool. And how do you do your sound design? Is that also done through coding, or you're doing most of the sound design in Ableton?
So that's my little hack with Ableton. The system that I use is a Max MSP-based system.
Okay.
So it talks directly to Ableton on a track-by-track basis.
Got it.
But what that means is that I'm able to go ahead and predetermine the sound design.
Okay.
So I usually set up a sound palette in advance that I think is kind of something that I can work with for a while. I have a range of timbres, a range of different percussions, and kits to work with that I also know won't push my system too hard.
Yeah.
And that way I can keep things coming in and out and leave things untouched for a while and have the flexibility to create a longer or shorter set as I see fit.
Very cool. And you'll be performing a live coding set for us on Saturday. What are your intentions and your goals for the set?
I really like coming up with these glitchy polyrhythms that they're not too spastic, but something that's definitely groovy. I want to create something that's listenable, something that is experiential, but also something that you can walk away from and think back on and say, okay, that had definite rhythm to it. That was definitely something that maybe a guitarist could hop in and play along with.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I want to experiment with later on too, is getting more instrumentalists involved with the live coding process. So I think that's another direction I'm going.
Cool. And you have an EP coming out next week?
I do, yes.
Tell us about that.
I created an AntiPolice Brutality EP over the last year that kind of is a reflection of how I was feeling during the turmoil of the previous year, as well as some of my experiences just as a black man.
Yep.
So I created this EP kind of going over that experience, and then also included some commentary from James Baldwin that I thought was kind of poignant, and mixed that in with some police footage as well. So
what was this commentary about?
It was from a interview that he had with Dick Gavitt, and he was talking about how as a black man he was being used as an accessory to murder, or how as black people we get used as an accessory to our own murder. And I thought that given some of the situations that we've been witnessing over the past few years, and how this has been kind of just thrust upon the public display, it almost seems like it's intentional. We know that there's some intentionality behind it, but it's just how much is the real question.
And was there any specific moment that kind of helped you, or rather made you connect with that specific commentary?
There was some graphic footage that I just scoured through online from Reddit and from YouTube, just going through clips of people submitting their own accounts of police violence and of just moments that probably shouldn't have happened that were caught on tape. And I took some of that audio and spliced that in with the James Baldwin commentary, and as well as some comments that were said during the interview that were kind of just awkward. And then I used that to kind of frame this image of us as a people being kind of put against this really interesting backdrop that is not in our best intention.
Wow, that's really powerful. And I feel like in this city in particular, given that the Black population has largely declined over the last 20 years, it doesn't feel like we've done as good of a job, even though we do have a Black mayor right now. It doesn't feel like we've done as good of a job as we should to create an inclusive community. Has that personally impacted you in the last few years living in San Francisco?
I've been lucky in that I have been kind of under the, not safety net, but I was using the GI Bill to get through school. So if you're unfamiliar, that is a program that veterans are able to kind of tap into that allows them to get scholarship funding for a program if they get accepted into it. So thankfully, I was not really put into too dire a position. I mean, there were definitely some dire positions, but I was able to overcome with what I had. I'm a resourceful person. So I was able to make things work out, and that definitely helped. And I know not a lot of people have resources like that available. I know that there are issues with housing. There are issues with people even getting access to food and clean water. So the fact that, anything is available to somebody, I think I'm thankful for. And I only hope that things get better. I can't say that things have gotten better in my time here, as a Black man. I've kind of moved around and seen some of the nicer parts of town and some of the not so nicer parts of town. And there definitely does still seem to be a racial divide, even among the Black community. There's now a racial divide growing amongst the Black community and other races, which I think is kind of like that we need to look at ourselves and say, like, this has been something that we're experiencing. This is not something that we need to be inflicting upon other people. So I think there's a lot of division and divisiveness right now, but hopefully, through impactful art, through things like this, through meaningful conversations, we can make some sort of difference, and somebody will react.
Well, I appreciate you having this conversation. Obviously, it's very personal topics and things that are not so easy to talk about.
Absolutely.
So really appreciate hearing your perspective, and definitely agree that there's so much that art and culture can do. So I'm hoping that some of your music, including your upcoming EP, can have the type of impact that you want.
Thank you. Oh, and I don't think I mentioned the album is called Black Cell. Okay. It'll be available on all digital platforms on the 26th of this month. So.
Very cool.
Look forward to that.
Yeah, we'll be sure to share it out to everyone.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming and chatting, and really looking forward to your set on Saturday.
Yes.
All
awesome.
Right.